Okay, we have, or I have another beautiful day here, and I thought that I would take advantage of it. So this is not the day that I normally record, so we're not going to be interrupted by trucks now and again. But there is work going on the street, so I can't guarantee that there won't be other loud noises that might interrupt us from time to time. Right, so what we're doing here is the second reading from Zimmermann, just a few pages, and by and large they work by way of review of concepts that we dealt with last time in looking at Augustine on the inner word and in looking at the earlier reading from Zimmermann. But we're going to take that a few pages further now and both consolidate some ideas and perhaps introduce one or two nuances. So let's just do that. Let's just walk our way through this reading and see what we come up with. So the first thing that I want to draw attention to is the notion that all understanding should be self-understanding. And what Zimmermann wants here, again, he's reading Gadamer closely, so we're still working with Gadamer, though we're not directly working with the reading from Gadamer that we did a couple of weeks ago. But what Zimmermann wants from Gadamer here is the notion that when we understand something, it's because we are applying it ourselves. We are making it our own. So he's got this little tagline a few lines below where he says, appropriation and interpretation are the same in this language event. Now, appropriation means that you make it your own. Now, appropriation is one of those words that is a bit tricky in contemporary cultural conversation, but we want here the sense that interpretation is inevitable, and that we connect with something in working with it in our own finitude, within our own time, within our own circumstances. Now, the tremendous upside of this is that interpretation, therefore, necessarily involves creativity. So it's not about, if you think back to the first week and the little reading from Carney, it's not as though what we're trying to do is slavishly imitate what we have read or what we have seen in the past. If we're going to interpret appropriately, if we're going to interpret properly, we're going to interpret according to our own circumstances, and that's necessarily going to involve a certain amount of creativity. So this is really good news for artists, for what it is that we can do with language, for our role in the unfolding of things. So that's the first point. And you'll notice that in talking about this, he pits that against the Enlightenment. And when Zimmermann says, at the same time, however, Gadamer wants to avoid the Enlightenment's autonomous subject with its inevitable subjectivism. So this notion that he's after here, and the idea of creativity or appropriation, is different from the autonomous work of the subject or of free subjectivity, what we've been calling equivocity. It's different. It's different from that. And the reason why it's different has something to do with participation. The kind of knowledge gained through language is not objectivizing knowledge, but, as in the case of the divine word, participatory knowledge. What is true according to its being. It exists in the presence of an eternal spirit, and only then is it possible for the finite human mind to recognize, to know it. So in our finitude, we know this thing which, like ourselves, participates in, what's the phrase that he uses here? In the presence of an eternal spirit. So our connectedness with the thing through the inner word is possible through both the things belonging to the eternal spirit and our belonging to the eternal spirit. Knowledge is thus participation in being known. We are known, and the thing which we know is itself known by the divine mind which speaks both into being, right? So that's the kind of environment that Gadamer is imagining, that frees us both from the extreme of inevitable subjectivism on the one hand, and a narrow objectivizing knowledge on the other hand. Subjectivizing equate with equivocity. Objectivizing equate with univocity. So we're looking at something other. It's not quite enough to say it's something, oh, it's in between, it's a little bit of both. That's not going to get it done, philosophically speaking. What we want and what we need is this participatory environment to arrive at a different understanding of our connectedness to being and how it is that we know things, and the place of our knowledge and our creativity, therefore, within that. Now, the word that Zimmermann highlights in talking about this is the word event. Let's pick this up then in the second paragraph. The event character of an argument, a plan, a text is its self-evidence that there is something true about it, that we discern even before we reflect on it critically. Now, there are some really important words in this sentence. The first important word is the word event. So what is an event? It's the sense that we have of there being a self-evidence that there is something true. So this is like the coming to know a thing, which is our acquisition of the inner word of the thing, the connectedness between us and the being of the thing itself. And it strikes us, or it reaches us as a whole. We have a sense of it as a whole. And that is the sense of self-evidence. It's like an aha moment. It's an intuition. It's a sense that, yes, I have this. And the third thing that's important here is the last phrase where Zimmermann says that we discern even before we reflect on it critically. The word critically is a gesture to the Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant, who wrote a critique of reason and a critique of pure judgment. His way of doing philosophy, his enlightened way of doing philosophy, was about critical appropriation, or critical appreciation of things by the work of logic and discursive reasoning. And what Gadamer is wanting to retrieve from Augustine, from the pre-modern way of thinking is that there's an eventedness to knowing. There's an event quality, an appreciation of the whole of something. So this is something that we looked at a little bit last time with the sense of a whole that then unfolds for us historically. And so this is why this reading is a little bit of a recap, a little bit of a review and clarification of something that we've already looked at. So in the next sentence, when he says, thus understanding is the event or arrival of truth, that little phrase, arrival of truth, you might be inclined to think of that as, well, yes, I puzzle it out, like, doing a math problem or something like that, or doing a difficult reading and, puzzling it out and making sense of, looking up the words and making sense of the phrases and reading the secondary source, listening to a lecture, puzzling it out, and then you arrive at the truth once you've done all of that hard work. But that way of thinking about arrival at truth is really the Kantian way of discursive rationality, the critique of pure reason, putting in the hard work. What Zimmermann means here by the arrival of truth has to be taken more in line with the notion of the event quality of truth, the sense of an aha moment. And he says here that we discern even before we reflect on it critically, even before. Yes, okay, so it doesn't have to happen, at the very beginning, but it happens like that aha moment when you're in the midst of something. You don't think that you've figured it out yet, and yet all of a sudden something happens, something clicks. Maybe for those of us who read novels, sometimes you really get it. You know what the book is about, or a play, or a poem, or other kinds of reading as well. You get it. You haven't arrived at the end of it yet. You haven't seen the full unpacking of the work, but you know where this is going, or something like that, or you have a sense of what matters. And I think it's even fair to say it's a sense of what matters to you, because there is your appropriation. And again, that doesn't have to wait until the very end. That doesn't have to wait until you consult your classmates or have a discussion group or whatever, right? It's that you've appropriated, you've had this event quality of truth. You've had this arrival of truth. And that's what's going on then in the Zimmermann then quotes Gadamer again, and we are drawn into an event of truth and arrive, as it were, too late if we want to know what we were supposed to believe. That's interesting, because if we think that, oh well, we can control it, right? Like, well, what is it that I'm supposed to believe? I want to know that, and then I'm going to decide for myself whether I think that that's true or not. He says that's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. You have a sense of something even before you've arrived at that, complete discursive, at the end of that complete discursive process. Okay, so those, I think, are the main points here. The notion of appropriation and interpretation being the same thing, and therefore that carrying with it creativity. The other side of that, the sense of belonging to, participation in, that is true both of the subject matter or the object that we're looking at and of ourselves. And then this term, the event quality or the eventedness. There are a couple of other things that I want to draw attention to over the page, and again, partly just reinforcing things that were said last time, but also something a little bit new here. Okay, so turning over to page 174. Again, this is returning to the idea of, like, what is history? What is historical knowing? What does it mean to know as part of belonging to a tradition? In the first full paragraph on page 174 that starts with, Augustine also teaches the importance of questioning and answer, which Gadamer also considers indispensable for the elucidation of a subject matter. Truth, for Augustine, is like an event that is conceived in its entirety, but that we can only see with the mind by exploring it from various angles. Okay, so the truth dawns on us as a whole, but we can only unpack it or work with it in a question and answer or dialogical kind of way. And Augustine gives us a reason for this. The reason for the listener's inability immediately to grasp the whole lies in his own weakness. He is unable to let the light illumine the whole problem. Though he cannot behold the whole at once, yet when he is questioned about the parts which compose the whole, he is induced to bring them one by one into light. So this is slightly tricky in the wording that's used here, because the paragraph has just said that truth for Augustine is like an event that is conceived in its entirety. So he's making a sort of distinction here between the inner word as the arrival of the truth as a whole, and then, you know, that bit that we did last week where we talked about how even when you put it into thought, let alone words, that putting the inner word into thoughts that are words that you imagine speaking, even that is the outer word, not the inner word. So that's the distinction that's being applied in this paragraph as well. You have an intuition of the whole, but as you think about it, let alone talk about it, you can only do that bit by bit. And in the Socratic method, the dialogical approach is that teasing out bit by bit that which is conceived in its entirety, that which is conceived as a whole. And Socratic dialogue, which Augustine adheres to, which he affirms, could go on and on, unendingly. Why? Because the thing known participates in the eternal God, right? So that which we know is a participation in the divine reality, and that's what Zimmermann is going to go on to emphasize in the next paragraph, where he says, "Logos Christology." That phrase just means logos means word. Think about John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So that's the logos bit. Christology is just a word that means referring to Christ in the Christian tradition, and the idea that he's the Son of God, and the nativity, the incarnation, all of that, some of which we discussed last time. So Logos Christology proposes that our minds and the world were designed by the same maker to be compatible. So the compatibility, the idea of knowability between us and the thing known, is because of this participation in the divine reality. One other point that I want to make, but something just in passing that we get at the bottom of the page here. Part of Zimmermann's project in writing what he's writing here is to say, look, Gadamer is a really important 20th century German philosopher of language, but he has gotten his key ideas from a pre-modern thinker. So Gadamer is modern, could maybe call him postmodern. He certainly influences or thinks along postmodern lines, but his timing is dates. But anyway, he's a critic of modernity, let's put it that way. And Zimmermann is saying, look, as a critic of modernity, he's drawing on a pre-modern understanding. So that's part of his argument, and that's why he says a little bit of what he does That's the footnote 7 at the bottom of the page. That also came up earlier, I suppose, on page 172, bottom page 172, top page 173 from the reading that we did last time. So that's kind of by and by. The last point that I want to make has to do with what is said on page 175. First of all, just repeating the earlier point. So the Socratic dialogue, right? You have this unity of truth, but you have to tease it out through a dialogical or historical or traditioned way of thinking, right? So we just, because of our human finitude, we can't articulate the whole all at once. So at the very top of page 175, he says, according to which the multiplicity of what is thought proceeds only from the unity of the word. The multiplicity of what is thought proceeds only from the unity of the word. We think in terms of multiplicity. We have varying perspectives, varying viewpoints, seeming changes over time in how we think about a subject matter. We're all big on inclusiveness because we know that there are multiple ways of thinking about a thing. But for Gadamer, for Zimmermann, for Augustine, that multiplicity is connected to and dependent on the unity from which it proceeds. Right? So it's a splintering, a fracturing of the unity of truth into time, into our finitude, into our time-boundedness, and the necessarily unfolding quality of that which it is that we know, which is why tradition and a human conversation and a dialogue and a staying together is really important. And that makes politics really important, because politics is all about our figuring out how to live with one another. And if truth is an eventedness, if the truth of things is given to us as an event, then we need everybody's viewpoint. We need everybody's contribution. We need the dialogue that cannot break down. If it well and truly breaks down, then we're going to miss dimensions of that which is given. So again, like you can see, two different views of what rhetoric is, right? So is rhetoric just about manipulation? Presidential debates going on right now. Is it about that? About gaming for power, or is rhetoric really the very act of truth happening moment by moment as we go? So that's not the point that I want. The last point that I wanted to make. That was kind of linking to what we had just been talking about. The last point that I want to make has to do with the sense of eventedness coming back to us. So he says here, he summarizes. He's summarizing. Zimmermann is summarizing what he's been talking about. These insights are then formulated as the two basic pillars of the hermeneutic experience. Whatever. What I want to pick up on is the second one. Second, the hermeneutical experience as the experience of traditionary meaning. Our experience as interpreters, as speakers, as creators, has a share in the immediacy which has always distinguished the experience of the beautiful. And I just want you to, allow yourself to imagine this. As students, it's easy to get used to the idea that, well, I don't know, I'm just learning. I'll make up my mind later. And that's good. That's important. That's a kind of a posture of humility. That's really great. But don't sell yourself short, because as an interpreter, you have a share in the immediacy of that which we know. When you know something, you know it as a whole. Can you unpack it as a whole? No. Welcome to the human race. Can you unpack it as well as the next person? Maybe, maybe not. No. Are you an A student, A+ student, B student? Yeah, that's what you're figuring out, right? But are you in the game? Absolutely. Absolutely, you're in the game. And that immediacy has something to do with beauty. So, hermeneutic experience is the experience of traditionary meaning, has a share in the immediacy, which has always distinguished the experience of the beautiful as that of all evidence of truth. Now, for Plato, you might want at this point to be thinking of his three transcendentals: the true, the beautiful, and the good. So for Plato, ultimately these three things can't be prized apart, right? They belong together. And that's something that is being gestured to here, that our sense of truth goes together with a sense of beauty. And again, like when you're writing an essay on an art subject, an English subject, yeah, you have to put in the hard work, you're going to do the slog, right? But don't lose sight of your appreciation, your apprehension, your appropriation of the beauty of the thing, that insight, that moment when you said, I really love Shakespeare. That was a moment, right? That came to you, and that was an encounter with the beautiful. And what Gadamer is saying, what Augustine is saying, is that is a characteristic of our of our acquisition of knowledge, of our appreciation of the truth. Truth and the beautiful belong together. Okay, what I want to do now is I want to go on to look at a few poems and also a couple of pictures to think about the relationship between the multiple and the unified, because this is a really, really important theme. And it plays itself out in the development of Western intellectual culture. Obviously, by intellectual, I'm including both knowledge and beauty. And that's what I want to do now, just to kind of wrap up this section of the course, and as a final sort of as a final preparation for writing your midterm, which is going to be an answer to the question, what does Augustine mean by the inner word? So if you like this last little bit, you can just take it for free. You can apply it if you want. This is partly a response to that, saying, well, I'm a visual learner. We'll move away now for a little bit from the hard slog that we've been doing with the secondary source readings, and the different, but perhaps even more challenging reading that we've been doing by reading the primary source of Augustine's De Trinitate. Okay, I'll leave it there for now and come back with a few slides and a little discussion of some poems and paintings. Right.